I've been meaning to share this story for a while, and even though I'm going to share it with you, my whole journey has been several years long. I'm just going to tell probably like 2 years worth of this story. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with my story, I'm just going to leave you hanging until we get into it. So I'm just going to get into it right now because I think right now especially we could all use, I know I could use a story of somebody's comeback or somebody who just desperately wanted to give up, but they didn't, and they came out the other side better because of it. So anyway, I would say growing up that I had a pretty good life and I was pretty athletic, and I started running cross country and track in middle school, started running through high school and college, and I actually remember writing my essay in order to get into a bunch of colleges. I had to write an essay about, I think it was like the hardest choice or the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. And like I said, my life was pretty good up until this point. And the thing I wrote about was me switching from lacrosse to track. Like that was the hardest thing I had to do. I would switch from lacrosse to track, like figure out like, oh, which one should I do? And eventually I went with track. But that's what I wrote when I went to college. And I knew at that time, I was like, wow, I've had it pretty easy. This is the hardest thing I've had to do. And I always, in the back of my mind, kind of wanted some sort of struggle because I always wanted to prove to myself like what kind of person I am. Because I don't really think that anybody really knows what type of person they are until they've gone through some sort of serious struggle. So anyway, like I said, went through high school, college, started running, or kept running, and then somewhere around my sophomore year of college, I was, training in the fall, getting ready for indoor track, and I just got like a random cold, and I was like, this sucks. It's a couple weeks in front of the time trial, but it's just a cold. I'll get over it. And every day that I would go for a run, I would feel fine during the day after the cold was gone. But then during the run, like 15 minutes into it, I would just like hit a wall. It was like nothing I've ever felt before. And it just didn't seem to get any better. I actually got tested for just the normal run-of-the-mill things that runners get tested for, like mono, some sort of vitamin or mineral deficiency, especially anemia. Not even pretty much everything came back completely clean. So the most frustrating part, probably the second most depressing part of this story is just not knowing what's going on. But every day I was getting weaker and weaker, and the only way that I can describe it, I don't even know how to put it into words, how I felt exactly, but I remember like doing a couple of workouts on the track where we were supposed to like sprint like pretty fast. And it just felt like I had the muscles there, but I couldn't access them. And it was the weirdest, most frustrating feeling because it didn't feel like, it didn't even necessarily feel like I was weak. It felt like I had the muscles, but I just, for some reason, they were just out of reach and I just couldn't use them. And it was the most frustrating experience I have ever had as far as running goes. And it was just awful. And every day I just seemed to get weaker and weaker. And eventually, I started getting numb, tingly sensations, and I just sort of brushed them off because I was like, look, I'm in college. Me and my friends don't want to pay the heating bill. Like, we went to bed sometimes and like I would wear a hat and gloves. I could like see my breath. I would like reach for my water in the morning and it would like be cold. It wouldn't be like room temperature. It was like cold. So I was like, oh, it's just because, you get numb and tingly when you're cold all the time. But I would go to class and I would still feel it. And actually, I remember specifically, I stuck my hand into a dryer one time, and it, like numb, tingling sensation just went crazy, like up to like my wrist. And I like told my friends that I was like, "This is really weird." And it was, the same time that I was getting weaker and weaker. So something in the back of my mind told me like it was something neurological. But then in the front of my mind, I was just like, "I'm 19. 19-year-olds don't get neurological serious things don't happen to them. It's like for old people." But it just kept getting worse and worse. Like no matter what I did, no matter what I got tested for, we couldn't find anything. And then I remember going for a run when I came home from winter break with my older sister, and it was like maybe 2 miles, which was like really nothing compared to like what we were doing most of the time because she was also a runner. I remember just finishing the run and like my body was like, it was almost like my body was still going forwards when I was trying to stop. And then my sister was like, "Oh, Craig, stop being so dramatic." I was like, "I'm not being dramatic. Like it's hard to control my body right now." And then I just remember her being like, "What?" Like it was so hard to explain to people too because I didn't know what was going on, and it was like not that common. And I actually had a couple of my friends ask me if it was all in my head, and that was really frustrating. Like not knowing exactly what's going on, not even being able to explain to people that well. I remember I also went to the doctor, and the doctor said that I was just experiencing stress. And if you know me in my personal life, I am about the exact opposite of a stressful person. Like I'm a type B personality, like to the max. But anyway, I went for another run by myself, and this is what I wrote in my running log back in 2010. I don't even know how to describe how I felt on this run. I was planning on going for just 1 mile, but I didn't stop because I was tired. I stopped because it felt dangerous to run. In the first couple of steps, my legs felt sort of numb and heavy, and like I had little muscular control over them. I felt like at any moment I would just tip over. I decided to just run around the block. When I stopped, I almost did fall over. Again, not because I was tired, but because it was like I couldn't even control my own body. I've been very clumsy lately, even with little things like typing. I'm making more mistakes than I used to. I don't even know what's going on, and slowly losing muscular control is kind of scary. And the worst part is, I have no clue what is going on or how to fix it. I just want to be able to run again. And I'm really glad that I wrote stuff down in my running log like that so that I can actually look back, because like I often forget that my hands and like my upper body was affected too. So I mean, I was obviously getting weaker, but I was getting weaker all over. So like even my hands were like, I had a lot less dexterity in my hands, which was not as fun as it sounds. So when I was home, I got tested for a bunch of other stuff. I got tested for asthma. I got like a bunch of neurological blood work done, which apparently for neurological blood work, like when they're testing for neurological things in your blood, they take a lot of blood, like a lot more than you, well, that's what it looked like. They took like 7 vials. And then I asked the nurse how much they took, and she said it was like 4 or 5 tablespoons. I was like, okay, it's not really that much, but it looked like a lot. But then I also got an MRI to check for MS, because I remember telling my neurologist that every time I got out of the shower, like a hot shower especially, I would just feel like really weak. And he said that that was basically the telltale sign of MS. And we were like, all right, well, maybe it's MS. But then that came back negative. And, you know, like I said, this was probably the second most depressing time, is just not knowing what's going on. Like I didn't know before I got tested, I didn't know if it was MS. I didn't know if it was Lyme disease. I didn't know if it was Lou Gehrig's disease. I had never heard of the disease that I actually got diagnosed with. So me and my family, like we didn't know if I was going to die from this. And it was honestly, like looking at your own death when you're possible death when you're 19 years old is, again, that's not as fun as it sounds either. Then I got a nerve conduction velocity test and an EMG, which basically is just shocking different parts of your body. And I remember asking my neurologist, like, why are you shocking different parts of my body with different voltages? And he just looked at me funny. He's like, I'm not shocking your body with different voltages. It's all the same voltage. But like when he would shock my toes or my fingertips, it didn't really feel that bad. But if he shocked behind my hamstring or like up near my elbow, like my arms and legs would just like jump. And he said that it was just because I clearly had more nerve damage in the more distal parts of my body instead of like the more proximal parts. Like basically the further out in my body it was, the more it was affected. Like it was kind of like a gradient of numb and tingly and weakness, spreading from my fingers all the way down my arms, and then spreading from my toes all the way up to like my hips. So then my neurologist diagnosed me with an autoimmune disease called Guillain-Barré syndrome. And he told me that it was the most mild case he had ever seen, and I was thrilled to hold that record. But just to be on the safe side, he also ordered a spinal tap for me to get done. So a couple days later, I got a spinal tap. And that was probably, I wouldn't say it's not excruciatingly painful, but it was probably the most uncomfortable pain that I've ever been in my life, if that makes any sense at all. But it gets even better, because it's relatively common when you get a spinal tap that your spinal column won't completely close up. So basically you have internal leakage of your spinal fluid, which is no bueno. Basically that means that you will have spinal headaches. And before I got a blood patch, we'll get into in a second, I was bedridden with spinal headaches for about a week. And when I say bedridden, I mean like I had to lay horizontal, or I had to have my head below my spine. So like when I was eating, I had to either, well, loud, I had to either lay down, or I had to like eat like a dog. Like I would be on the ground like this, eating my food, because you have to have your head below your spine. Because you don't have enough cerebral spinal fluid bathing your brain. So it was like the most intense headaches I've ever had. If I needed to take a shower, I had to be like hopped up on hydrocodone. If you're super hydrated, that helped. I think it just increased the amount of the very little cerebral spinal fluid that you did have. And also caffeine helped. So I was like drinking Mountain Dew and coffee. I don't really like coffee, but I was drinking a lot of coffee that week. And like I said, hydrocodone, hydration, and then I would just like take my shower quick and then just go back to the couch where I just lay down, because once you lay down, your headache just goes away immediately. But like once you lift your head up, it comes back immediately. And I remember I had to crawl to the bathroom and especially in the morning. I mean, the morning was the worst because you have to go to the bathroom when you wake up, but you also are dehydrated, basically. So I wasn't hydrated. I hadn't taken hydrocodone in a long time. I didn't have any caffeine, so I'd crawl to the bathroom. I would stand up, pee as fast as I possibly could, just like force it out, and then I'd basically drop down to my hands and knees, and then just crawl back to the bed or couch, and then basically just lay there the rest of the day. And this all actually happened the first week of school for the semester. So I was like, okay, well, I missed the first week of school. And so that went on for about a week, and then I got what is called a blood patch, where they basically just take blood from your arm, they stick it in your back, that basically forms a clot, and then it sort of patches everything up. And then it was all good. And I had never been so grateful to be able just to sit up in my life. Like, I didn't realize what a luxury it was to be able to sit up. Like, when you literally are incapable of sitting up unless you just want to be in immense amounts of pain, like, you become really grateful for just being able to sit up. And that was, like, I know it's really cliche to think, oh, you don't really know what you have until it's gone, but like, I never learned that lesson so hard in my life. So appreciate everything you have going on. Like, I remember when all this was happening, I was like, well, at least my vision is fine. At least I can hear okay. At least I can still read. I have access to the internet. I have friends and family who love me. I know where my next meal is going to come from. Like, I would always just like count my blessings, because it's just like the little things that we just take for granted every day, like sitting up. Like, once it gets taken away, you realize how great it really is. So again, this all happened during the first week of school. I missed classes. And then I was also told by my neurologist, and just from looking up information about my autoimmune disease, I was told that usually the people who get Guillain-Barré syndrome become paralyzed within like a day to a couple days. It's usually 4 weeks or less you become paralyzed. So I remember going to bed every night, being kind of scared, and then being like, when I woke up, I would just like move my arms and legs like as fast as I could, just be like, okay, I'm not paralyzed. Because that was like my biggest fear, was going to sleep and then waking up paralyzed. And I know sometimes people who get this autoimmune disease become so paralyzed that they can't even breathe on their own. They can only blink. So I just remember thinking, like, how awful would that be if I woke up so paralyzed that I couldn't breathe and I literally just suffocated. And that was pretty terrifying to like, every day that I would wake up, if I was even like remotely awake after sleeping, I would just like move my arms and legs so quickly. And I remember having a conversation with my twin about if I became completely paralyzed and I couldn't do anything except for blink. I told her that if she came to visit me, then 3 blinks would mean yes and 2 blinks would mean no. So once I got my Morse code down, I then contacted my high school track coach, and I was like, hey, you know, I'm going to be home for this whole semester. Assuming I don't randomly become paralyzed, I would love to coach track. So I started volunteer coaching for outdoor track, and that was a lot of fun. Before I became paralyzed, I was studying exercise physiology in college. So I initially wanted to be an NCAA track and field and cross country coach. And I was like, hey, what better time to build up my coaching resume than when I can't go to school, because I can devote all of my time to coaching. And I was just wanted to use my time as effectively as I possibly could, because I always try to make any adversity that I go through just an opportunity for something else, like an opportunity for me to build my coaching resume. So I coached all spring basically, and by the end of the season, I actually had to start using a cane to get around, because before I would just like walk slowly and have to like really make sure I pick up my feet so I don't trip over my own feet. And I would fall every now and then, but I started walking with a cane, and right before that, I remember people would ask me if I was limping or if I was getting worse, and I was always just make excuses like, oh no, I just pushed myself too hard yesterday, or it's too cold today, or it's too hot today, because either one can affect you negatively. And in New York, it can be either too hot or too cold one day. But once I started using a cane, it was pretty obvious that I was just still getting worse. So I did a lot of my own research on YouTube and Google, and I found out that I actually didn't have Guillain-Barré syndrome. I actually had an autoimmune disease which was very similar, called the chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. And really the only difference between the two autoimmune diseases is that one you get paralyzed almost instantly, and the other one you become paralyzed over the course of like several months, which is exactly what was happening to me. So I sent an email to my neurologist saying, hey, I don't think I had GBS, I think I might actually have CADP. And he got me in like the next day. He was really worried because he thought that I'd be getting better by now. And he saw me and he was just like, yes, you don't have GBS, you actually have CADP. So I like to say I diagnosed myself. So then he got me on the drug that I took called Intravenous Immunoglobulins, also called IVIG, which is basically you just stick like a needle in your arm. You go to an infusion center, have a needle stuck in your arm, and you have like this pole with like this medicine. It just gets like slowly IV dripped into you over the course of a couple hours. I really didn't have any side effects. Some people experience like flu-like symptoms afterwards, or like just be really tired. I think twice I got like really tired, I got a headache, but that was about it. And I used to have to get the medication like every week. So I was really lucky that I didn't have any side effects. But at first, my insurance company didn't want to pay for the treatment because it cost $7,000 to $8,000 per treatment. So that was gonna be a lot of money from them. And that was really frustrating because my legs were basically taken away from me. And I was also told, if I get this medication, give it some time for it to really kick in, and then you'll basically be back good as new. And my insurance company was like, well, it's not life or death, so like, I mean, it doesn't really matter. So that was awful. Basically having my quality of life, I guess, doesn't matter to Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield. But I don't want to hate on them too much because they did eventually pay for my treatment. And actually we had a benefit to help my family pay for all the treatments because like I said, it cost $7,000 to $8,000. My parents had high deductible insurance, so after a certain amount, then everything was covered. But they had to come up with that, amount ahead of time. So that was really tough. So it was really, really great that we had a lot of the local community members just come in and like just donate to us, which I cannot thank those people enough. If you're watching, thank you so much. But like I said before, the second most depressing time of my autoimmune disease story was when I didn't know exactly what was going on. So I actually got really excited when I got my correct diagnosis. I was like, this seems way more accurate, and I was so excited because I felt like if we knew what was going on, then we could start fighting it. Because if you don't know what's going on or what you're fighting up against, it's so depressing. But the most depressing time was when I was receiving my medication, not only to get IVIG, but probably close to like a month after I started my IVIG treatment. I was also prescribed 60 milligrams of prednisone to take every day. And I was also going to physical therapy twice a week, but the most depressing time was when I was getting my prednisone, I was getting my IVIG, I was going to physical therapy, and for probably about 6 to 7 weeks after I started my treatment, I was still declining. I was like still getting worse, and I felt like we were doing everything we possibly could, and I was still getting worse. And it got so bad to a point where when I wanted to go up the stairs, I would just sit on, if I didn't have someone carry me up the steps, I would just sit on a step. I would put my hands on the step behind me, and I would push myself up with my upper body, and then I would sit on the next step, and then I would pick my next leg up, put it on the next stair, pick my other leg up, put it on the next stair, and I would just like push myself up, and that's how I would go up the stairs to my house, because we lived on the second floor. And in order to take a bath, I couldn't even lift my legs up in order to get in the bath. I would have to just like sit on the side of the tub. I would have to have either my sister or my parents literally just like lift my leg up and put it in the tub because I was so paralyzed. It was just, my legs didn't work. Like the only thing that my legs could do is like, if I wanted to, I could go like this, maybe. Like it was a huge effort just to like move my leg up a tiny bit. They just felt like, my legs just felt like they were like thousands of pounds, and they're just numb and tingly all the time. So I remember one time especially, I got into the tub, and my mom, I think it was, who helped me into the tub, left the room, and I just remember crying. Like that was the first time I remember crying because of all this, because we were just doing everything we possibly could. I couldn't think of another single thing that we could possibly do. I was going to physical therapy twice a week. I was getting medication from IVIG once a week. I was getting prednisone. We were looking into diet, and I was trying to eat as healthy as I possibly could. I was like not cheating or anything. And I still was getting worse and worse. I was getting weaker, and like, it was so bad. I mean, I just keep on explaining like how bad it was, but like if I was in bed and I wanted to turn over, I could turn over like my torso, but I would have to like take my arms and move my legs over because I just couldn't use them. But I just remember crying, and like, I'm not a religious person, so I don't really, and I don't believe in like karma or anything, but I just remember thinking like, why me? Like what did I do to deserve this? And I mean, looking back, like I think I knew at the time, like, you don't deserve to get an autoimmune disease. Nothing, it's just, in my opinion, it's not like some higher being trying to like teach you a lesson or something like that. Sometimes you just get dealt a bad hand. But after I had my little cry, I turned on my pump up music, which at the time was an album by Red Light King, which I highly recommend. That whole album is just like, it's just a really good album if you're making a comeback, especially the song Comeback. I definitely really recommend that album. And I definitely think that like if you're going through anything really hard, like it's fine to cry, it's fine to want to give up, it's fine to want to just give in and just like feel bad for yourself. But after you're done feeling like that, you gotta turn on your pump up music and you gotta take your bath, and then you gotta call your mom to help you get out of the bath. You know, cry, get everything out, and then just move on and just keep going and don't give up. And then I remember a couple days later, again, I just really wanted to give up because I was going to physical therapy, and pretty much every day we would do a sit to stand transition. So what that was is like there was a table that my physical therapist could higher or lower, and usually, you know, so a normal person does a sit to stand transition like this, but I was so weak I had to do a sit to stand transition like from here. Like the table was like right here, and I was like trying to go like this, and I was so weak every day I just couldn't do it. And it was getting really frustrating that I was trying to do something every day and I was just failing. And I remember just going into physical therapy that day thinking, I'm gonna ask my physical therapist if we can not do that for a while, because it doesn't make me feel very good about how things are going when I'm just trying to basically go from standing to standing. So I basically just really wanted to give up. And I really wanted to tell my physical therapist that, but I didn't. I kind of just didn't have the heart to tell her that. And then that day, that was the day that I did my first sit to stand transition. So I know from personal experience that often when you want to give up, that's when you're going to have your breakthrough. And I remember I just wanted to tell my physical therapist, like, I can't do this. And that was the day that I did it. And I know that I'm definitely not the only person who's done this. And I know that it kind of breaks my heart whenever I see someone who just wants to give up. And I know that if they just keep going, they'll find success. They'll get their breakthrough, whatever it is. Because you're never going to find success. You're never going to achieve anything if you just give up. And like I said, I'm just going to hammer it home. But I know from personal experience that often when you want to give up, that's when you're going to have your breakthrough. So you can't give up. I just remember, like, growing up, my parents told us all the time to don't give up, don't quit. And I also saw my parents, they would work like 80 to 100 hour weeks, and they had like almost nothing to show for it. And they still didn't give up. They worked for decades, and like, yeah, they told us never give up, but they also lived it. And I think that was part of the reason why I just didn't want to give up. Even though I wanted to give up, I didn't. And then also what I learned from track, like there was a lot of races when I can remember, especially one in particular, when I was racing and then somebody just blew by me and I was like, there's no way I can keep up with them. And I was like, just a little voice in my head was just like, well, what if I could? What if I can hang on? And then I just remember sticking behind this kid. And then with like 100 meters left, I was like, I actually don't really feel that awful. And then I just took off and I actually won the race. So, and like, I just know from personal experience that, like I said a million times, when you want to give up and if you just keep going, you'll probably find your success. So anyway, I hope that helps. I hope that helped anyone who's going through a tough time with the lockdown. And from there, I did keep getting better. And I eventually went back to this running camp that I used to go to back when I was a camper, and then I was there for a counselor before I became paralyzed. And then I thought that it was going to be my last time I ever went there. It was like the summer before I became paralyzed. And then I called them up and was like, hey, I can be a counselor again. They're like, great, we'll have you back. And I was so pumped. And my favorite thing every year was always getting a kid who didn't believe in themselves to believe in themselves. As you can see, like that, getting other people to believe in themselves just means a lot to me. And I remember one kid this past year, he was kind of lagging behind. Sounds so dumb for me to cry over this. But he was kind of lagging behind, and I decided to run with him because you always have to have a counselor with a kid. But I decided to run with him all the way back to the camp. And we had to go up some hills, and there was some counselors who would pass us, and then I would just yell like, hey, this kid eats hills for breakfast. And I would just tell him like, wow, you're really good at these hills. And then I could just see like a smile creep across his face, and he would just say, thanks, like kind of shy. But he would actually start to speed up, and it was just so cool to see a kid who didn't believe in himself to just start to believe in himself, because I know there's a lot of people who maybe they don't have anyone to tell them that they can do something. So just to see a kid not believe in themselves and then like almost instantly just see them start to believe in themselves, that means so much. So anyway, I hope that my crying helps you guys realize that you can do anything, and I just want all of you guys to believe in yourself, stay positive during this whole lockdown, count all your blessings, even when it sounds so silly. Just say like, I have access to the internet, I can see, I can hear, I can read, I still can use my arms and legs. You know, like all these little things that you don't realize that are so great until they're just taken away from you. I just hope that this video helps. So thanks.